Liyue is a land of many secrets and many mysteries, but no mystery is quite as mysterious as the mystery of whatever the heck is up with Zhongli. Even as far as enigmatic immortals go, Zhongli is incredibly strange. His story quest title isn't named after his constellation, he's the only Archon holding something square instead of something round, his nation is the only one with square visions, he's the oldest person we know in the entirety of Teyvat, but still he refuses to tell us anything, and he gets all coy when we pepper him with pretty harmless questions. There are so many weird little quirks about him that Crystal Marie on my channel Discord has a dedicated thread to documenting all of them, and she has very graciously allowed me to use some of her research in this video in order to support a very weird hypothesis I have about his true identity, so massive props and thanks to her for that. Now, tons of people have pitched theories suggesting that Zhongli is anything from a dragon sovereign to a shade of the Primordial One, to a descender, or even a normal adeptus. And the arguments for them are very compelling. But there's one hypothesis that I haven't seen yet. So today, in honor of the collaboration event with the Sanxingdui Museum, which features Zhongli, I would like to present a new theory, one which might explain a lot of Zhongli's idiosyncrasies. And it involves a lot of bull. Well, bovines. Let me explain my thought process. Zhongli's demon name is Morax, and in the Ars Goetia, Morax was mostly depicted as a bull demon, or like a man with the head of a bull. I think most people have assumed that this detail is either irrelevant or is only meant to reference the fact that Zhongli, in his draconic form, has horns, which makes him a horned god. And when I say most people, I guess I probably just mean me. I can't speak for a lot of other people. But nowadays, I don't think it's only meant as a reference to his horns, mostly because I'm not convinced he's a dragon at all, despite the shape that his exuvia takes. And a lot of this comes from the fact that Zhongli doesn't really have anything in common with Azhdaha, who is a true dragon, or Viships, which are juvenile dragons. See, according to the juvenile jade, which is the thing that the Primo Geovishap drops, crystals grow within Geovishaps, and when they come of age, the crystal will completely replace their heart, and it's only then that they become a true dragon. Now, technically speaking, Zhongli is called the Prime of the Adepti, which could either be the creator of the Adepti or the king of the Adepti, but the Adepti are not categorized as Viships or dragons. I think everyone can agree on that, right? However, the Adepti also have a legend that says when they die, they leave behind a crystalline heart. So we can make the case that Adepti are at least distantly related to or evolved from Viships. Kind of like how birds and alligators share a common ancestor, the Archosaur, but are incredibly different. I think this is similar to the ways in which Zhongli and Azhdaha, as well as the Adepti and the Viships, differ. So I have a really difficult time pointing to them and claiming that they are the same species. And you wouldn't call a bird an alligator, would you? Of course not. Like, this is an example of divergent evolution. That's kind of what I feel like is going on here. All of this is just to say that Zhongli takes the shape of a dragon but is not a real dragon, which might be why Azhdaha suggests that his and Zhongli's lifespans are very different because they are different types of life forms. I know it's all kind of nitpicky semantics on my part, and if you still want to call him a dragon, that's totally fine. Just keep all of this stuff in mind while I pitch the rest of the theory, because these little nuances kinda matter. Now, based on his history, imagery, choice of exuvia, and established friendship with Azhdaha, Zhongli was a god who greatly respected dragons. This is quite apropos because in Chinese, Zhongli's title of Rex Lapis is actually Yanwang Dijun, and Yanwang actually just means rock king and Dijun means emperor, and emperors in China were traditionally represented by the image of a dragon, or not necessarily dragons themselves. So if we assume that Zhongli is not a true dragon, then what's the deal with all these tiny little similarities between him and Neuvillette, a humanoid dragon sovereign? I'm not talking about anything too big, just stuff like their similarities in the dignified auras, their suits, their grandpa energy, the long-windedness, the shared voice lines about going for walks when you swap them into your party, both of them possessing story quest titles that don't match their constellations and instead refer to periods of history. Like, you get the idea, right? They're little inconsequential things, but they kind of add up until they feel like they should mean something. Well, I think they do mean something. I think these little tiny similarities are intentional, but I don't think it's because they're both dragons. See, Neuvillette is essentially the biblical Leviathan, an enormous sea monster that swallows the souls of the damned who will be served up and eaten at the end of time along with his earthly counterpart, the Behemoth. Ah, you thought I forgot about the bull thing, didn't you? Well, I didn't. It just so happens that the behemoth is most often depicted as a bull, or a hippo, but let's just go with bull for now. And that's why I think Zhongli might be a reference to the behemoth. The Leviathan, the Behemoth, and the Ziz make up this kind of primordial beastly triad within the Bible, and that's why I think their Genshin counterparts, Neuvillette and Zhongli, share similarities. I would talk about how the Ziz compares in all of this, but I don't know who it is for now. So that's a topic for another time. Anyway, apart from being frequently depicted as a bull, the behemoth was an incredibly powerful beast of the land, with limbs dense as metal and a roar that could subdue any beast that hears it. He's said to live in the marshes and is predominantly an herbivore, making him pretty chill whenever he's, not provoked. And in all honesty, this description should make you think of Azhdaha. He's got the big belly, the thick limbs, huge horns, a powerful tail, and an intimidating roar that we usually would associate with the behemoth. And he's also the ruler of the land, and he also looks like a bull. But the reason I'm vaguely gesturing towards Zhongli instead has to do with what happened to Neuvillette. See, in his original incarnation, Neuvillette was the heart of the Primordial Sea. After Celestia killed him during the Dragon Wars, they replaced him with a brand new life form, Egeria. Now, we don't know 100% for sure that Azhdaha is the original Geo-Sovereign, although I personally think he is. But my hypothesis is that Azhdaha was defeated by Celestia and sealed underground, with Zhongli set to take over whatever his original role would be. So think of Zhongli as someone created in the image of the behemoth in order to fulfill the same job. After all, he still lived in the marshes, he was king of all the land animals in the form of the Adepti, and he worked towards living a very peaceful existence full of alliances and contracts. As for whatever that role could be, I think it might have been the role of an archivist, something who preserves a historical record, kind of like the geologic record. This would fit really well with Azhdaha's ability to feed off of the ley lines because the ley lines contain all of the memories within Teyvat, and he also possessed the ability to impart and read the memories that were recorded within stones. I know this ability sounds a little too similar to what Irminsul does, but I kind of think of Irminsul as being a record of how people remember the past, and the geologic record that Azhdaha would have control over as like an absolute record of events that occurred in the past. Something pretty separate from fallible memories. And if Zhongli was meant to take over Azhdaha's role, it would explain why he's so fascinated with history. In fact, it might explain why he takes the shape of a dragon with his exuvia, and why he uses draconic imagery. He has a great respect for his predecessors, and maybe even his ancestors, and obviously the rest of the history of the world, of which the dragons play a huge part, so he wears the imagery of the dragons proudly. All that said, while I do think it's purposeful that Zhongli takes on the symbolism of the bull and the behemoth, that does not explain who or what he actually is. Like, we know Egeria was probably an oceanid-like being, and Venti is a wind spirit, so what is Zhongli if he's not a dragon, but someone created in the image of one? Not to change the subject, but have you ever heard of a god by the name of Apis? Well, technically his proper Egyptian name is Hapi, but the Greek name Apis is most used today. Basically, Apis was known as the solar bull, a fertility god who later became associated with funerals, born via a ray of heavenly light. And while not a solar deity in the same sense that Ra was, his cult was very popular and respected because Apis was considered the son of the Egyptian creator god Ptah. And he was also revered for being the intermediary between humans and gods. Sounds a little bit like the envoys of Celestia, doesn't it? But anyway, after reading that the first time, my brain kind of went, hey, is this a reference to Rex Apis? Which sounds kind of crazy, all things considered, until it doesn't. Because it just so happens that we have another solar deity who was heralded as a fertility god who eventually became a god of the afterlife. And that's Deshret. Deshret takes inspiration from the wind god Amun, which is also his demon name. At some point in history, the wind god Amun and the solar god Ra were merged into Amun-Ra, and Genshin leans really hard into the Ra identity. Possibly because both Ra and the demon Amun are depicted with bird heads. similar to how Morax is a man with a bull's head. And it's something we see referenced quite a lot inside of Deshret's pyramids. But Deshret is also a reference to Osiris, god of fertility and the underworld, making this relation to Rex Apis a bit more suspicious. See, the Guili Plains, which was Zhongli's domain before the Archon War, was also known as a land of the returning and the departing, which you can interpret as people traveling, like coming, going, like a port or a trading hub. But you could also interpret it as a place where people die and are reborn. Now the Gui, which comes from Guizhong, is the returning part of this name, while Li likely comes from Zhongli's original name. This is the departing part. And the guy whose name fragment is referring to the departing part of the returning and departing faked his own death and now works at a funeral parlor. Did I even mention the fact that Apis is known for his extremely expensive and extravagant funeral ceremonies? Like the one Zhongli threw for himself? And while Deshret may have been called the Scarlet King, he was also associated with gold, much like Zhongli. He was the king of the Gilded Sands and the creator of the Golden Slumber. He even had his own gold coins, which is odd because the only other gold currency is Mora, and that was invented by Zhongli. And maybe that's not a lot to work with, but you see the symbol on Zhongli's outfit? This is a Quincunx, a shape found in various locations throughout Teyvat, but rarely in this exact orientation, and yet Deshret uses it within his pyramids, this exact symbol. Now, a quincunx is also related to a symbol called Solomon's Knot, which is found everywhere and in many variations, from the ancient switches in the style of the Dragonspine ruins to the hypostasis arenas. Now, both of these symbols come from the fivefold symbol, wherein 5 circles representing the elements of air, earth, water, fire, and ether overlap to create a diamond pattern from which more symbols can be made. And this is where some of the pieces start to come together, because apart from being used above the doors on domains, the Spiral Abyss, and some unaffiliated ruins, this knot's variants are only found in areas with unique regional architecture. I already showed you some of Deshret's, so let's take a look at some other examples, like this symbol on the door and inside of this tomb in central Liyue, as well as the belts of the Yaksha statues. Now, if you move over to Fontaine, you can also find a few of these as well on the unique Remurian architecture, and a few more that are, from more recent times, within the Orthents. And over here in Mondstadt, you can go to Stormterror's Lair, where the old city used to be, and you'll find yet another variant of the symbol. What's interesting is that Sumeru, Fontaine, and Mondstadt all had god kings, and each region had its own special architecture. Mondstadt had Decarabian in the ruins of Old Mondstadt City, which are different from other Dragonspine-esque ruins, even if they are a little bit similar. And Sumeru obviously had Deshret in his ruins, so there's no need to elaborate on that. And Fontaine had Remus, but tying the ruins to Remuria is a little tricky. Like, they match the description of what I think Remuria is, based on the Ballad of the Fjords, where it describes the city of being made of white stone and gold, and also how the ruins of Remuria fell to the seafloor in the Song of Stillness, so I'm kind of counting them at least as Remurian style architecture, even if a lot of them were probably not made during the era of Remuria, if that makes sense. Either way, that is 3 god kings and 3 region-specific ruin types. Now, Inazuma has no god king and no unique architecture, unless you count Tsurumi, but those were built on Dragonspine-esque ruins, and that all came about due to the island being cut off from the rest of the world, and there is no defined god king there, and I don't think Kapatsir counts, so I'm disregarding it. So that leaves us with Liyue, which has unique architecture, and we know that architecture belongs to the Guili era dynasty, but there are no explicit god king mentions. We could postulate that the god king was Guizhong, but if you ask me, she's more likely to be a Seelie, kind of like the goddess of flowers. Admittedly, I don't have a ton to base this off of, but the goddess of flowers was exiled from heaven, so she should have fallen from the sky one day, and she left behind in her footsteps these blue lotuses that only bloom at night and are unique to Sumeru, which is, the region that she landed in. Similarly, Guizhong also seems to have come out of nowhere, although I'm kind of convinced she came from the chasm, but that's a topic for another time. And she is also associated with the night-blooming lilies of Liyue. Since the Seelies and the Moon Sisters were really close, I feel like that would make Guizhong more moon-aligned than sun-aligned, and as you're gonna see, basically all of the god kings have solar references. So that leaves us with Zhongli, and if he is Liyue's god king, that would explain a lot of things like his similarities with Deshret and how he feels ancient and deeply connected to everything, but isn't necessarily a bishop or a dragon. He is the only god king to survive the Archon War. And I think this realization alone can tell us a lot about the God Kings and what they were. So far, if we include Zhongli, 3 out of 4 of the God Kings are associated with great feats involving gold. Deshret's golden slumber and sands, Remus's golden ichor, chariot, and bees, and Zhongli's creation of the golden Mora. And if we follow the gold connection, we're gonna end up looking at stars, because gold is typically formed when 2 neutron stars collide, which makes this name card a little bit more ominous, in my opinion. And now we're back to the 5-fold symbol. See, these images of falling stars match Solomon's knot, and a variant called the Witch's Knot, a symbol representing creation, eternity, and the cycle of life. And it's also found on the back of the Sustainer of Heavenly Principles. Remember this for later. So if you square the Witch's Knot, a process that Genshin seems to do a lot, they love squaring things, then you get something like the Arabic Rub el Hizib, and I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong, I'm trying. But this symbol represents the sun and its 8 rays of light, which matters here because this is the exact symbol used in-game for the light sigils. Now, the Quincunx and Solomon's Knot variants are also called the Lover's Knot, or a marriage knot, while also being the alchemical symbol for gold because it represents the atomic structure of metals in alchemy. And when neutron stars collide, they create new elements like gold, which is literally real-world alchemy. You might even call this a chemical marriage, which will be a very familiar term to those of you who actually did the Narts and Kreutz World Quest. Now, stars in Genshin take both this 4-pointed star form and this very specific tetrahedron shape when in 3D. But did you know that this 3D version actually has a name? It's called Merkaba, which in Hebrew means chariot. And yes, this matters too, because apparently the solar chariot fell from the sky and formed the chasm when Zhongli was young. Now, I'm not saying that this is his chariot or anything, but consider the fact that Remus apparently descended from the sky in his golden Fortuna, and Fortuna is what we call pieces of constellations in-game, which are stars, and stars are also suns. Hence, a star chariot could also be a solar chariot. Which means that God Kings are connected to stars and the sun and light, and if we assume that the Primordial One, who rules Celestia and is therefore the highest god in Teyvat, is a being made of light, which does fit with the lore that we have that likens them to Phanes, whose body was made of light, then the God Kings might potentially be the sons of God. And yeah, that's an intentional pun. I'm not sorry. That would make them a type of star being. And maybe you haven't seen this other theory of mine where I postulate on the twins being literal sentient stars, specifically neutron stars. But in that video, I also said that the dragons might be a type of star being. And if that's true, then having the Primordial One and the God Kings also be star beings as well is not far-fetched at all. In fact, it explains similarities between Zhongli and the twins, and Deshret and the twins for that matter, you know, if Lilu Par's comments are even anything remotely reliable. And whenever we talk about star beings, we also have to think about suns, because suns are stars. And if Deshret is a solar deity, then what about the rest of the God Kings? Well, take a look at their depictions in-game. Zhongli is almost always shown with a solar disk behind him in the cutscenes, and his TCG card calls him a hidden stone and even likens him to a star. And Deshret also boasts the sun disk most of the time, and even Decarabian has a sun looming behind his tower. Now, I don't have anything solid apart from the Fortuna for Remus yet, but the architecture I think is based on Remurian style often has these stained glass windows that look a lot like the same shots of Decarabian's tower, so this may be a solar disk reference as well, although it's a bit tenuous. In addition to this, I have always thought it was really weird that Deshret was depicted as a black star in cutscenes, especially because he is a god king and so is Decarabia, and Decarabia, as the demon in the Ars Goetia, traditionally takes the shape of a pentagram star. You starting to see a pattern here? And if all that isn't tinfoil hat worthy enough for you, let's rewind back to the beginning of the game where we take a look at the Sustainer of Heavenly Principles, who has this cubic power which can capture and seal away whatever she wants to put in the box. She just puts it in this little gold or little red and black box. So we know that she's connected to Celestia, and she might even be a shade of the Primordial One. And if I'm right about these God Kings being kinda similar to being the sons of God, then they should be like a step down from the shades of the Primordial One, right? But they should possess some kind of similar abilities. Now, we can only really look at Zhongli here since he's the only one alive, but check this out. These red and black keys within domains have a red and black cube in the middle, and they're identical in every way except their color to the keys that we get to open the shrines of the depths. And those keys are used to both break seals, or more accurately, they help the shrines forget what they have lost. Therefore, the same logic can be true for domains as well. Activate the key inside and it breaks the seal on the petrified tree, which we then collect crystallized memories from, because that's what artifacts are. And that's what brings us back to Zhongli, because he's someone who very well might be able to put a cubic seal on someone. And maybe we've actually already seen this, because he might have put a cubic seal on Guizhong. Like, okay, take a look at this scene here where she's being sealed. Now, zoom in and enhance, and oh hey, look at it, it's a cube! Right smack dab in the middle of her seal. In fact, we might be able to link the power of suns to cubes thanks to the Helios in Enkanomiya, because the Shade of Time, Ishtaroth, was presumably the one to teach Abrax through his dreams, a power that Zhongli also seems to possess. She taught him how to construct exactly such a device. And the part that emits light is a cube. So Liyue Vision's being square might just be because the Archon is of a different nature. He's not a normal god, he's a god king, second only to the primordial dragons and the heavenly principles themselves. His symbols and powers are cubic, and had Deshret, Remus, or Decarabian seized Archonship as well, then I think those visions would have also been cubic. But, you know, speaking of Archons, it's always been interesting to me that Deshret outright refused a Gnosis, and therefore Archonship, when it was just, you know, handed to him. Instead, he decided to rebel against heaven, all while claiming that the cycle of 7 must be broken. Which is actually a really weird thing to say if there were only 4 God Kings back then, but then again, we did have 3 Moon Sisters, and one of them, Canon, is suspected to be the omnipresent god that's present in Inazuma. So perhaps originally it was 4 male sun gods and 3 female lunar gods. I mean, we have 3 moon sisters, why not 4 sun brothers? And actually, if Zhongli is brothers with Decarabian, Deshret, and Remus, it might explain some of the extra honorifics in his Chinese title, Yanwang Dijun. All the other god kings only use the Wang, meaning king, but Dijun, which means emperor, is added to Zhongli, putting him at a slightly higher position than the other 3. I have nothing to base this off of, really, but since he's both an emperor and so closely tied to everything Jade, he may be a direct reference to the Jade Emperor from Chinese mythology, and the Jade Emperor was the supreme ruler of heaven. So if Zhongli is of a more elevated status than his alleged brothers, then he might be the eldest son, and therefore the one who should inherit the earth, so to speak. It makes sense for him to therefore be represented by the most ancient, steadfast element there is. But with Deshret sealed and both Remus and Decarabian dead, Zhongli would be the only heir to the throne of heaven. But maybe his name, Zhongli, which means off the clock or time to retire, might not be just a reference to his retirement from Archonhood. It might also represent his way of showing his intent to relinquish his right to inherit the throne of heaven, or maybe to pass it along to someone else. Well, this was a fun little theory to cook up. Seriously though, Crystal Marie has been giving herself an honorary PhD in the study of Zhongli, and for every rabbit hole we explore, 4 more pop up in its place. I haven't even scratched the surface of all the stuff we've uncovered yet. I know this topic might have felt a little bit random in the wake of all the stuff that we still need to cover for Fontaine, but Lantern Rite is coming up and the Sanxingdui Museum collaboration is also on the horizon, and of course it features a living museum of an Archon Zhongli, so I figured why not spend a little time speculating on him, huh? It's always fun to revisit old topics with new information and new insights. But anyway, that's all from me for today. The names on screen right now belong to my little budding scholars. You know, like channel members. They support me and I give them stuff like this. Crack theories and lore, and who knows if it's an equivalent exchange, but I hope they're happy and I hope you also enjoyed this video. But whether you did or not, thanks for sticking around anyway. I still appreciate you. So take care of yourselves out there, and you know what? Happy early Lantern Rite.